part of it in Roseville, so
There you go, Craig.
it's fine. I'm just like, today,
Thanks, Brian.
it's like I don't go anywhere, do anything.
All right, good morning.
Like the weekend after.
Thanks again for joining us in person this week. I thought it was important. There were several meetings that happened since our last TAC meeting, and per those discussions, I thought it was important that we get together again and hear that data and allow time for us to discuss, maybe debate a little bit, how we move forward with the regional solicitation and some of these other elements. So with that, we'll call the meeting to order. First item is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll just consider that approved.
Chair,
Yeah,
I'm just going to acknowledge this as the minute taker. There's a couple of faces I don't recognize. I won't name faces unless if we can introduce ourselves, or I can just point to you and say, who are you?
I think we should go around, yeah.
yeah, why don't we do introductions again? I know there's a lot of new players at the table, so I'll start. Joe MacPherson with Anoka County, TAC Chair. We'll go this way.
Elaine Kutsukos, Coordinator for the Transportation Advisory Board.
Joe Barbeau with Met Council.
Jim Kosluchar, City of Fridley Funding and Programming Chair.
Modification, Suburban Transit Association.
Adam Harrington, Service Development, Metro Transit.
Robert Ellis, City of Eden Prairie.
Chris Hartzell, Woodbury.
Lisa Leitner, Washington County.
Chad Ellis, Hennepin County.
Paul Omi, Lakeville.
Molly McCartney, MnDOT and TAC Vice Chair.
Lyndon Robgen, Carver County.
Kathleen Mayall, City of Minneapolis.
Ruben Collins, City of St. Paul.
Mackenzie Turner Bargan, here as the pedestrian modal rep.
Aaron Labrie, Dakota County.
Russ Mathis, Egan.
Brian Isaacson, Ramsey County, and welcome to Ramsey County. Glad you're here.
Bridget Reef, Metropolitan Airports Commission.
Greg Jensen, Scott County.
Kyle Sabota, Bicycle.
Nick Peterson, St. Paul. Welcome to St. Paul.
Partner. Wonderful, thank you, thank you. So second order of business here, approval of the January 8th, 2025 Technical Advisory Committee minutes. Does anyone have any changes on the minutes? Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you. Second by Craig.
Molly and Lyndon.
That was Molly and Craig.
Not even close in a second.
Yeah. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed by the same sign? All right, that is approved. Next, we'll move to public comment. Have you guys received any public comment?
Chair, we have not.
Okay. Is there anyone here today? Public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll move forward. I'll turn it over to Elaine for the TAB report.
Thank you, Chair. TAB met on January 15th. For the Chair's report, Chair Hovland welcomed two new TAB members, Maijong Chung from Ramsey County, Victor Lake, Prior Lake, and Taylor Hubbard Chaska, who the last two were appointed by Metro Cities, Don Doe, new TAB District E, and Kevin Burkhart, TAB District B alternate, appointed by Met Council. For the MnDOT report, Connie Siebgen reported that the unofficial total fatalities statewide in 2024 was 471, with 130 in the metro area. Of the 130 fatalities, 53 were on the trunk highway system and the rest on the local system. And as of the TAB meeting to date, there had been 11 fatalities, also by January 15th. For the MPCA, Frank Kolash reported that for the Volkswagen program, MPCA continues to manage 700 projects across Minnesota, which were implemented over 8 years. The Climate Subcabinet is working on the Climate Action Framework update for 2025. And MnDOT is the leading stakeholder for the input process for the transportation chapter. And for the Metropolitan Airports Commission, Bridget Reef reported that CEO Brian Reichs will be presenting at the Metropolitan Council on January 22nd on the status of MAC and MSP. And he would present the latest in operations and routes, sustainability efforts, and other items. For the Metropolitan Council report, Chambliss reported that the US DOT announced federal charging and fueling infrastructure grant awards. The Metropolitan Council was awarded $15 million grant for EV charging stations in the region, and development of a program to deploy funds will begin along with the regional solicitation development, depending on what happens federally. The Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported that Maple Grove Transit and Plymouth Metrolink expect to have results for their joint transit study within the next few weeks. And Southwest is working on a fixed route service to the Mall of America and the airport and continues to sort through regulatory matters to launch autonomous vehicle service. For the business items, TAB approved the selection of the TAB Executive Committee for 2025. They approved the Imagine 2050 Transportation Policy Plan, a streamlined tip amendment for MnDOT's I-94 and 35E bridge improvements, and a streamlined tip amendment for MnDOT's Section 5310 bus purchases, both of which came through TAC. And then for information items, there was an update on the regional solicitation evaluation. Chair Hovland reported on the policymaker work group that met prior to the TAB. Steve Peterson provided an update of the outcomes of the workshop. Joe MacPherson provided feedback from the TAC meeting. And then the policymaker work group will meet on February 19th prior to the TAB Executive Committee in a couple weeks. And TAB members requested a copy of the presentation that was discussed at the working group and information on historical geographic distribution of regional solicitation funding and examples of goals-based approach that other regions had done. There was also an update on the arterial bus rapid transit and Minneapolis's Vision Zero, their traffic safety plan.
All right, thank you, Elaine. Appreciate that report. Next, we'll move into committee reports. And first off, we have the executive committee. We met this morning at 8:15. In addition to going through the items that are before you, the action items, we also discussed the calendar for this year and our meeting schedule. And so the schedule will remain the same, but as far as meeting in person versus virtual, we want to be mindful of all of your time. But with that in mind, we also have some pretty important dates ahead of us here. As we're all well aware, we're working through the revamp of the regional solicitation. And so with that, there's going to be points in here where we want to have that active conversation. And like many of you, I feel that it's easier to read a person's face in person than it is on the computer, and you're not distracted by doing emails and other things when maybe you're not as engaged. So with that in mind, in March here, since we've had the first two meetings in person, our plan is that March would be a virtual meeting, and then April will be our next in-person meeting. So I know a lot of people have families as well. They may be doing spring breaks in March. So I think it's also timely too that in April, Steve and Molly will be before us, and TAB will have to start making some, not necessarily firm decisions, but giving some guidance to the project team on that. So with that in mind, that kind of sums up our executive committee meeting this morning. Next, we'll move into action item 2025-08, which is a streamlined tip amendment, MnDOT's CSAH 83 dual turn lane study consultant services. And Robbie's out sick today, so we're stuck with Joe.
Yeah. So I'm moving from there to here because you're gonna be sick with me a lot today, so I might as well just stand here. So the first one is 2025-08, and that's a tip amendment request for MnDOT to add consultant services for a study of dual turn lanes on CSAH 83 or Canterbury Road near US 169 in Shakopee. The project would be funded with HSIP funds, not provided through the competitive HSIP solicitation. The intersections on Canterbury Road are at 12th Avenue, US 169, Eagle Creek Boulevard / Deans Lake Boulevard, and CSAH 16. And so it's a new consultant services small contract. With that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Joe. Do we have any questions or discussion on this item? Yes, Lyndon?
Mr. Chair, why does this need to be an amendment for that kind of money?
It's federal money. It has to be there. I guess it's kind of rare that we have consultant services, but it's not the first time. Okay. I don't know if anybody else here has a better answer than that, but it is federal money. Those kind of things are usually not done with federal money.
Thanks, Chair. Lyndon, yeah, most of our consultant work is state funds and really doesn't have to be in the STIP or TIP, and this is being added with federal funds, so we have to put it into the TIP.
Okay, thank you. Yep. With that, I would entertain a motion to,
Move to approve.
All right, thank you, Lyndon. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed by the same sign? All right, that motion passes. Next, we'll move on to action item 2025-09, which is a streamlined tip amendment for MnDOT's I-394 auxiliary lane, bridge, retaining wall, signal, and intersection modifications project. Again, we've got Joe.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a request also from MnDOT to amend the tip to increase the cost of the project that you just sort of summarized, I-394 auxiliary lane and other items as part of that project. It's a two-line project, which means it has a separate line for each funding source. Some of it is HSIP, and that has its own line. So the project is, it's moving from fiscal year 25 to 26, which is actually the kind of thing that in and of itself would be an administrative modification you wouldn't see. But the total cost between the two is increasing pretty significantly from 8.5 million to basically 15 million. The main project is funded through the NHPP, not the solicitation, and also there's the safety portion, the HSIP portion that's funded through also like the past project, not the regional solicitation HSIP that goes through this process. With that, I would stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Joe. Do we have any questions or comments? It is a pretty significant increase in cost, but I know Molly, we discussed it at the executive committee, and it sounds like the scope has changed quite a bit on this project as it's grown. So I think we're all well aware of that and empathetic to that process. So,
Mr. Chair.
yes.
I have a question about the scope of the project. Just to summarize, these are auxiliary lanes between Xenia and Louisiana.
Chair?
Yes.
Adam. So the project limits are basically from Pennsylvania to Xenia. The auxiliary lane is less than a third of a mile, but the other work, that's it's about an eighth of a mile. The HSIP was like the catalyst to add the auxiliary lane in going through scoping. Our maintenance, we wanted to do a full shoulder for safety of people pulling over on the side of the road, as well as our maintenance folks. That pushed us to do some retaining wall replacement and a new retaining wall at Louisiana, which then triggered a water main replacement with the locals and rebuilding Wayzata Avenue in portions of that around that interchange. So it is a not ideal situation to have scope change like this so much, but it is ultimately safety related, and we want to be responsible to the local partner that has some cost share in this, as well as major disruptions for this project. So, it's a part of our program dollars. We had some rollover from year 1 to year 2 of the biennium, so we're able to cover that cost without pushing anything out of the fiscal year.
Chair.
Yes.
So is this program year 2026, so construction would begin in 2026? Just trying to get a sense of the impacts to the operation.
So it's an LE, which is an early late encumbrance. So we would advertise it in late fiscal 25 and be able to award the contract as of like July 1st, if we are operating on July 1st. We have a budget set by the legislature. So if the project manager has not been in contact with Metro Transit, we can make sure we coordinate.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Innocent.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I just have a question for Joe. With the scope change and the increase in the cost, if this project is still grew with the category that it was picked, will it still be able to be funded?
Mr. Chair and Innocent, this wasn't funded through the regional solicitations. This is MnDOT program.
Amended, okay.
But this would be a scope change if it had come through our process, I would say yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
All right, thank you. So just a quick reminder, this is the recommended motion is that the Technical Advisory Committee recommend approval of an amendment to increase the cost of the MnDOT I-394 auxiliary lane bridge repair, retaining wall, signal, and intersection modification project. Does anyone want to make a motion?
Move to approve.
All right, thanks, Brian.
Second.
Second with Lyndon. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign? All right, that motion carries. Thank you. Next, I believe we have a quick update on the TAC. It's a technical working group focused more on the transit side. I believe, Cole, you're going to provide an update on where they're at?
Yeah, thank you. Morning, members. This is a new thing for the TAC. We're going to do a monthly update on our technical working groups. So last month was is the meeting of the transit planning technical working groups. This is the first update on them. 2 months ago, we had the bike ped planning work group. We're not going to update you on that, but next month we will update you on that. They're on alternating months. So every month you'll get an update from one of the technical working groups. Normally Bradley Bobbitt would be here, our transit planner, to give this, but he's out of the office, so I'm going to step in today. We had 3 information items last month at the transit planning technical working group, one of which is on the agenda today, the regional solicitation evaluation. So Steve and Molly presented that item to the group, focused specifically on the transit components of the proposal and the concepts that are out there. There was some discussion around that, specifically talks about difficulties in comparing fixed route expansion projects to microtransit and whether there's a need to create separate categories for those, and some ideas to explore measures to better understand what that would look like. So that's something we have to dig into more. Could there be a funding set aside for microtransit? Just recognizing that's what a lot of priorities are for our transit providers. Also an acknowledgement that having too many categories may limit the funding for any particular category. So, you don't want to have too many transit categories in which TAB says we have to fund one of all of them, because some of them might not have great projects in a particular year. So that was a concern that was brought up. There's also some conversations about considering how support facilities fit, if that's a desire of the TAB to fund. So where would they fit in the structures that have been proposed? And again, how do those tie out to our goals and objectives? What measures would we have? What are we trying to prioritize with those? A lot of this got a little cut short. It was actually a robust discussion. So we are planning to do a follow-up both with the group in 2 months, as well as with a small group of transit provider staff that were very vocal about just wanting to kind of have a more robust conversation. So we're going to have a follow-up with them, hopefully this month ahead of that next meeting, so we can have more conversation about that. There was also a presentation on comp plan transit-related minimum requirements coming out of the TPP, so that's local government comp plan updates. Joe Whiting presented on the transit-related minimum requirements for comp plans, primarily focusing on things that are new this cycle. There was some questions about station area planning and whether Metro Transit could lead some arterial bus rapid transit station area planning. And so that was feedback we're going to pass on to Metro Transit. Suggestion that we have one-on-one meetings with cities or like communities to better understand how to do good transit and land use coordination in their plan. For those who didn't follow this, last time we did a lot of workshops, but we did less kind of like one-on-one conversations with communities. So I think that's a potential need. And then also interest in transit providers and county governments better collaborating with cities on their comp plans, especially since most transit plans come from counties or transit providers. And then Metro Transit, Kyle Burrows gave an update on the arterial BRT plan, including what's in the plan right now, what's in development, what's the scope of the upcoming study and update, including identifying the J, K, and L lines, which we know is of importance to TAB and the TAC. And then noting that the J line is anticipated to be named ahead of the 2026 solicitation based on their schedule. There was a couple of questions about how this all relates to Network Now, and whether this is Metro Transit focused or broader than that. It is Metro Transit focused, but there is coordination with other providers. And then a member asked about the new legislation around ADA requirements and corners of intersections for ABRT. So there's some clarifying discussions about that. The final item, not necessarily on the agenda, but we did have a turnover in leadership. So first I want to thank Cindy Harper and actually Lissa for chairing and co-chairing that group. For a little over a year, we had our original chair step down because he took another job. But just noting that the next chairs will be Stephanie Alexander from Southwest Transit, and the vice chair will be Ethan Buss from MVTA. And they serve 2-year terms to chair that group. So I know we have a couple of members that were there if you guys want to add any additional insights, but otherwise, take any questions.
Thank you, Cole. Any questions for Cole? Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Cole.
And I'll maybe just note, one of the reasons we're doing this is just to remind you all that this group exists. So if you have anything you want to send to them for discussion topics, that's always welcome, and we'd love the direction of TAC if you want. Otherwise, we can create our own agendas. No problems there. So thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thanks, Cole. All right. Next, we're going to move on to the Planning Committee. And my computer screen just went down, but the first item here we have is for adopting targets, performance targets here, federal performance targets. And so I'll turn it over to the Planning Committee Chair, Gina.
Morning, Chair and committee members. The TAC Planning Committee did meet on January 9th, and we had one action item. Dave is actually going to give this presentation. He's got the details on it, but I'll just kind of summarize the TAC planning discussion. We did approve the staff recommended motion, which was to adjust the 2025 target for non-interstate NHS pavement in good condition, as well as NHS bridges in good condition. So those are suggested to be changed slightly based on MnDOT's recent changes to their own performance measures. So the item here is essentially to make sure the MPO's performance measures are in line with MnDOT's performance measures. There was some discussion about that at the committee. I think there was a concern that changing the targets to reduce so it reduces the amount that would be in good condition and puts more in fair condition to be more realistic based on current trends. I think like previous discussions TAC planning has had on performance measures, I think there's a concern of always changing our targets based on anticipated performance and where is that line of where do we just hold the standard and adjust our activities to try and meet those performance measures. So I think that's more of a philosophical discussion the committee has had over the last couple of items related to performance measures. In sum, I think the committee was comfortable with these, mostly because it didn't change the amount of pavement or bridge that was in the poor category. So moving more things from good to fair seemed fairly acceptable. I think there was a question about, is this painting too rosy of a picture when we have conversations about aging infrastructure and funding needs, whether at the state and federal levels. So I think that was maybe the one concern that the committee had with this item. But with that, I will kind of turn it over to Dave to go through the details on what it means, because TAC will be asked to take action on this today.
Thank you, Gina.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me well, and hope everyone is having a good Wednesday morning. So here I'm just going to provide a little bit of background on the federal performance measures in general. So federal transportation law requires MPOs to adopt transportation system performance measures for a number of areas, including, as you see, safety, pavement condition, et cetera. The performance measures are actually kind of a subset of our transportation policy plan performance measures, but they're focused more on short-term achievable outcomes, which is really what the feds intended when they set up this program. Safety and transit targets are set annually, whereas all the other are 4-year targets with the option to change the targets after a 2-year midpoint, which is where we're at right now, that 2-year midpoint. So the performance measures for pavement condition, bridge condition, and travel time reliability were initially adopted, those 4-year targets, in March of 2023. As I said, federal law provides an opportunity for us to adjust those 4-year targets at the midpoint. MnDOT did adjust its pavement condition target in good condition and bridge target in good condition on October 1st of 2024. We have until March 30th of this year to also adjust our targets. The council did previously adopt the same targets as MnDOT to plan and program to support the statewide targets. And so the proposed amended targets will ensure we're still in line with the adopted statewide targets. So I just want to point out here in red, we have the non-interstate NHS pavement in good condition and the NHS bridges in good condition. Those are the only 2 of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 performance measures that we officially adopted in 2023. So all the others are going to remain the same, or we're proposing to have remain the same. Just looking at those 2 individual measures, again, NHS pavement in good condition and NHS bridges in good condition. Just a little bit of background here. You can kind of see, here's our existing performance. We have the MnDOT adopted target, which was adopted again in 2023. We're at the midpoint, showing that 2025 target and the proposed 2023 metro area target, which again is right in line with the MnDOT target. A couple of notes here. Again, these pavement and bridge condition measures reflect the expected outcomes based upon pavement projects within the existing program. It's based on something called Ride Quality Index, which is kind of how it sounds. They drive a road and look at the rutting and stuff like that, and basically the quality of the pavement. There is, this is key, a difference between how MnDOT assesses pavement quality traditionally versus how it must be assessed for the purpose of the federal performance measure. So one thing we do need to remember when looking at these numbers, in particular here for the pavement condition, is that the vast majority is actually in fair condition, and then you have good condition and poor condition. The concern is poor condition, not necessarily the difference between good condition and fair condition. That's per MnDOT. So the pavement change from 55% in good condition to 40% is due in part to this sort of unanticipated increase, in particular in the rutting and that methodological difference between the state and the feds. This did cause an unexpected increase in pavement that already has or did move from good condition to fair condition, but not any that, well, not a substantial amount that actually moved to poor condition. So this just reflects the fact that it might not be in good condition, it's in fair condition because of that rutting and kind of MnDOT standards of what they would like to prioritize with their funding. Terms of bridges, MnDOT, you see the NHS bridges by deck area in good condition going from 35% to 20%. MnDOT prioritizes safety of bridges, meaning a far stronger emphasis on managing the program to keep bridges from falling into poor condition and thus being vulnerable to failure. The emphasis is not as much on ensuring that they're in good condition versus fair condition. It's really on ensuring that they don't fall into poor condition. So a poor condition would mean that there is potentially, a safety issue or a bridge is vulnerable to hopefully not failure, but it's not worth funding improvements that would basically bring something from a fair condition to a good condition. Emphasis, again, is on making sure it doesn't fall into poor condition. Fair condition bridges does not affect the safety of the bridge structure. So that was kind of a lot of information, but as you can see here, what we are proposing to do is reflect the adopted MnDOT statewide targets for the metro area for that non-interstate NHS in good condition and the NHS bridges by deck area in good condition. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Yeah, Brian.
Couple of questions, David. Thank you for the presentation. Do I understand right that what we're saying is that the difference between federal standards and MnDOT standards is that one is a higher standard based on this difference of rutting versus not?
Thank you, Brian and Mr. Chair.
I can't speak to the specific, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know exactly what the difference is. But yes, there is a methodological difference. I'm not sure what all is in play, but yes, my understanding is MnDOT will accept more rutting on a road than the federal measures
That's where I was heading. And the
would
second
allow
question,
for.
Dave, is, so just for clarity's sake, this is only on the non-interstate NHS, which is state highways and other principal arterials, right?
Absolutely correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Brian. Yeah, Lyndon.
Yeah, so question maybe for you on MnDOT. So is this like a money thing where, you know, we don't have fare on here. We don't set a target for fare, right? Which is something to talk about maybe. But I'm assuming that when they have a decision tree on when to do treatments on their roads.
Yep.
We kind of follow a similar one, but I would imagine by changing this target, those treatments are gonna change on when they do stuff like seal coats or whatever, you know, not necessarily major maintenance, but minor, which costs money. So is this a money thing that they don't have enough funding to get it to the 55?
Great question, Lyndon, Mr. Chair. My understanding is really this is reflective of just an unexpected change in that methodology, or not change in methodology, unexpected because of the methodological differences where just after they did it, more kind of fell into that fair condition. And I do believe, I've unfortunately, the person who was kind of the mastermind behind this at MnDOT left her position right after these were set. But yes, there is a desire more to not necessarily do unnecessary roadway improvements to roads that are in fair condition.
Yeah, so David, quick question here, and Molly, I'll turn it over to you in a second. So I think one thing will be key here moving forward is just how you package the narrative with this.
Yep.
And, you know, how it's presented, because I know a lot of us on the local side, we go after state bridge bonds to support our system. And so, like we talked about a little bit in the executive committee, there's always a kind of a vague line between what's a target and what's a goal. You can easily get those two confused. And so these are targets, which my understanding is if we're not meeting the targets, then we could be at jeopardy of, I'm not sure if it's fines, if it's loss of revenue from the Fed, something like that. Not sure what that entails, but I think that narrative will be important to carry forward as this moves forward. But
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this?
Mr. Chair. Yes. So related to that, I would hope that it doesn't influence funding that's available. You know, that's kind of related to Lyndon's question, because, you know, is it a shortfall? Well, maybe if you kind of flip that, you know, is this going to influence the availability of money for MnDOT to do those improvements in the future, and then more things do slip? I would want to make sure that that doesn't happen too.
Yep. Great. Yeah. Molly, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. So Molly from MnDOT. So yeah, the performance measures are set by our performance measures group at central office, and then you know, that direction is given to the districts. We work in programming with our materials engineer, district materials engineer, and district bridge engineer with the bridge and pavement models to look at the, you know, the program of usually segments or structures that should come up for a variety of type of work based on their condition and funding available. So I would say at the district level, the poor target is the more important number that we look at and is used at looking at, you know, a bigger fix. But then we also strive to keep things in good and fair condition. So this change could have an impact on, you know, what projects are being selected. You know, it's the difference maybe of trying to a smaller fix to keep a bridge in fair or good condition as opposed to letting it deteriorate over time, so that it's a bigger fix when it comes into the poor, it's classified as poor condition. So there's usually not a risk of losing money. It's usually when our poor numbers get closer to that target or over that target, that we intensify investment in that. So when we do the 5-year MnSHIP highway investment plan, it often is a pendulum swing between bridge and pavement. So if your bridge number, poor numbers are getting to a certain point, we will be told over the next 5 years to invest more in bridges, and the targets will increase, funding targets will increase that way, vice versa with pavement. When we start to see those poor numbers get bigger, we'll get a push to invest more in pavement. So it's, there's an ebb and flow, and tends to take care of itself. So no loss of funding, and I don't think that's an issue. And, the justification on, do we match targets to meet conditions? I think that's maybe something MnDOT internally could debate a little bit more, but I don't really have a whole lot more to say about that.
Okay, thanks, Molly. Yeah, Lyndon.
Yeah, so we've heard it from the counties, and maybe this is something you could ask the MnDOT pavement people, is the way they rate the roads has changed. They got new equipment. They have a new truck and a new laser system, and it's way more sensitive. So perhaps that has something to do with it. The rating itself has changed, so it looks like the roads are in worse shape than they are, just the way they're rated. I don't know if that's part of the reason why this has happened. So when they rated their whole system, the reality is the new numbers are worse because of the new technology or the new laser. I don't know if that's true. We've heard that at the county level, because we use MnDOT to do our ratings as well. The state aid pays for a van and the rating, and I think they use the same system. So that might be another reason.
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to there is it's getting to the point where those cameras are so sensitive, they pick up the grooves when you groove in the pavement markings and all of that. It's catching that as a crack or
Right, they're really sensitive. So I don't know if that's part of it.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I'm sure, inflation, you only have the same budget, right, to do pavement. So is it, this money will get us to this rating, you know what I mean? Kind of, that's part of it too.
Yep. Molly?
Chair, thanks. So the vans that measure the ride quality index for our system as well as the locals, I think there's lots of things we could discuss about how that works. Depending on what, they're not driving every lane on a multi-lane road. They're driving probably the worst lane, that right lane that gets used the most. So that could have something to do with it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I agree. The story, how you tell the story is important, because if you look at this from high level, people are going to go, whoa, roads are going to get worse.
Yeah. Brian, do you have a question?
Yeah, just one more thing. And I would echo Lyndon's comment that TAB's going to want to, they're going to dig into this in a weird way, as we can expect. But I think, Molly, is it fair to say, and if you're not comfortable commenting, that's fine too, but is it fair to say that this looks like a bit of a philosophical change? Like with bridge in particular, you tend not to have bridges in good condition unless they're relatively new. And so this is a change from more managing bridges from moving away from replacing bridges. Like we're trying to stretch that time frame. Is that a fair thing to say? And is it also fair to say for pavement?
Chair, Brian. Fair is probably the bigger category, more square footage of bridge deck is in a fair, because you're right about the good. It might help us do the work to keep a bridge in fair longer and let it slip into poor.
Yeah.
We have enough inventory of bridge decks in poor condition to keep us in business for a long time. So that's not
job security.
And again, the performance measures the loss of funding is not an issue with this. But it's a way maybe for our bridge programming people to manage their overall program. We have 1,400 bridges in Metro District alone, so that this is a statewide thing might impact other districts in a little different way too. And as we take care of $2 billion bridge up in Duluth Superior, things could totally change. That the Blatnick Bridge is a significant part of our overall bridge deck area for the whole state. So
10%.
I feel like once that bridge gets redone, these numbers could look really different. It's like 2% of the whole state's, bridge deck areas and on that bridge, so.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, otherwise I'll circle back. So the action item before us here is that TAC Planning Committee recommend, that the Transportation Advisory Board recommend the adoption of the adjusted federal infrastructure performance measures to the Metropolitan Council with the following revisions. Again, we're not adjusting all of them, just the two areas that you see on the board here. An adjustment of the 2025 target for non-interstate NHS pavement in good condition from 55 down to 40. And then an adjustment of the 2025 target for National Highway System bridges in good condition from 35 down to 20. So would anyone like to make that motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Chad. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign? All right, that one passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that completes the Planning Committee. Next we'll move towards the Funding and Programming Committee. The Chair, Jim, I think you passed the torch to Joe on this one. You're going to let him carry the reins, so.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll just summarize. We met on January 23rd. The upcoming 4 items were approved with some limited discussion. And then we had a presentation by Steve on the regional solicitation development of application groupings. And so that discussion was probably the majority of the meeting. Joe will, I guess, present these 4 items that were approved at Funding and Programming.
All right, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Chair and Chair. I'll start with the first item, which is the program year extension request from Columbia Heights to 2025-06, Columbia Heights Central Avenue Lighting and Pedestrian Improvements Project. So the City of Columbia Heights was awarded $2 million in the 2022 HSIP solicitation. Both of these are HSIP solicitation projects for continuous street lighting, sidewalk improvements, ADA curb ramps, and crosswalk markings on Minnesota 65, otherwise known as Central Avenue, from 43rd Avenue to 47th. The project was programmed for fiscal year 25, following the Minnesota 65, Minnesota 47 PEL, or Planning Environmental Linkages Study. MnDOT committed $25 million to the Trunk Highway 65 corridor for fiscal year 28. So this request would enable the city's project to be constructed alongside MnDOT's project with Metro Transit's 2028 F-Line arterial bus rapid transit project. It is an exception to the current program year policy, a policy we'll be talking about momentarily, allowing for a 1-year, one-time extension, particularly in this case, a 1-year extension. But given that the request Metropolitan Council is, but given the request that the council, my own typing is bad here. That's consistent with recent exceptions to this policy. So therefore, staff recommends approval for the sake of efficiently combining the 2 projects. The MnDOT staff that administers HSIP funds has informed us that they're able to balance the year budgets between this and the next request, and to make those years balance out. With that, I'd stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Joe. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, the recommended motion here is that the Technical Advisory Committee recommend approval of Columbia Heights program year extension request for its Minnesota 65, Trunk Highway 65, Central Avenue Lighting and Pedestrian Improvement Project, moving that from 2025 to fiscal year 2028. Does anyone want to make a motion on that?
So moved.
Thank you, Mackenzie.
Second.
Thank you. Adam? All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign? All right, that one passes.
Okay, the next program year extension is for Minneapolis's Whittier Neighborhood Safety Improvements Project. The city was awarded $1,350,000 in the 2022 HSIP application for unsignalized intersection safety improvements, ADA ramp upgrades, curb up extensions, and/or pedestrian medians, bike buffer medians at 5 intersections. At 11 intersections, rather, in the Whittier neighborhood. The city is requesting an extension from 25 to 26 to better align with its 2027 Safe Routes to School project along 26th, 27th, and 28th Streets in the Whittier neighborhood. The extension would allow for reduced construction impacts and general coordination between the 2 projects. This project is on track to be authorized in 2026 despite not having scored the 7 points in the score sheet. Staff and MnDOT Metro District State Aid believe that the project is on track given that the city has been actively working on the project, including a project kickoff meeting with the State Aid office. Further, the request takes on characteristics of an exception to the current policy because allowing for a one-year extension, given that the request is meant to enable the project to coordinate with a later project. That's all I have, so I stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Joe. And just to confirm on these two items here, Colleen with state aid, she's okay with these. She doesn't foresee any issues as far as funding and moving these around?
Correct. So they informed me that the funding is all set for the year, the current year, or not the current year, the 26 where these projects are moving from and the future years that they're being, they did all that before submitting.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Joe. Do we have any questions? Yes, Adam?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just noting that on this project, it's also at a place where we have Metro Transit bus stops and bus operating. We've been working with the city of Minneapolis to ensure that we can continue to have bus stops located in places that they're suitable for our customers and working through the potential conflicts of where pedestrian zones area are or bike lanes. So that's, just note that that's an important factor for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, Linda?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so a question about the 27 safe routes to school. So that they're aligning better with that. Does that mean that project's going to get moved up to 26?
I don't believe so. I believe it means that the 1 year gap gives enables that to be seamless, but I don't know if Kathleen knows about that. I didn't ask.
I don't know the details, but I would assume the same thing, Joe.
Okay.
Because I would guess
It's just
I
a
can't.
core, they just work better together.
Correct.
Even though they're
And
separate years.
I guess I can't state this definitively, but I would think that that would have come along with a request for that project as well if there was. The other option is they could be ACing the project and doing the project early and getting reimbursed.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Okay. Elaine?
And I did ask Colleen that question, whether it was going to be AC, and I cannot remember the answer.
But in any case, it's balanced and the coordination is being taken care of.
Yeah, Joe, I'll just add that in the justification, I think it talks about issuing one bid set for the two projects.
So they must be gone, it must be gone early, the 27 job. Okay.
You see. All right, Adam, you had a question?
Just noting that the Safe Routes to School is a good project, and part of why we have our bus route going where it does is because it provides a connection to South High School from these streets.
Wonderful. Okay. Any other further comments or questions? Otherwise, the recommended motion before us is that the TAC recommend approval of Minneapolis's program year extension request for its Whittier Neighborhood Intersection Safety Improvements Project from 2025 to 2026. Anyone want to make a motion on that one?
Innocent, you are so moved.
Thank you, Innocent. A second?
Second, Peterson.
Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign? All right, that one passes. All right, next item, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. As discussed at TAC Exec today, the next item is a 2024 number because it started in 2024. And you have seen this before, the next two items before, in fact, in various iterations. So this is the second time we've brought this to you. I'll start with 2024-40, the scope change policy update. It's the second time we've brought this to you, and the impetus was because prior to or after about 2017 or so, a lot of scope changes, most scope changes, in fact, have been related to eliminating a part of a project and putting that project on top of another project to create some of the efficiencies involved with combining projects, and this being done with no on-the-ground changes. And there wasn't really necessarily a piece of the current policy that allowed or didn't allow for that in many of these cases, or acknowledge that this is something that is going to look the same on the ground, so we don't need to deny it if it happens to mess with the scoring or whatever. So we've been meeting with this since, believe it or not, late 2023. Thank you to anybody in here that was part of that. I know, I believe Robert was, and maybe a couple others. It's been a long process. So there's a lot of changes that are shown in the track changes in the agenda item. And so the gist of what we want to do is that moving project elements to another project with no on-the-ground changes would be approved in one of two ways, either administratively or through the process that scope changes tend to be approved through. So if it's approved through the process, the difference that we'd be seeing as a result of this would be that there would actually be language in the policy that would direct these committees to approve something that doesn't have any changes. We also allow for administrative process for anything being, if the amount being moved from here to here is less than 10% of the awarded amount and $500,000 or less of federal funding. So the federal removal, another piece being changed is that the federal removal amounts of up to $50,000 would not result in funding being returned by the applicant. And the reason for that is every time we come to these meetings with small changes, as a staff, we have a difficult time telling you what is a good or not good amount to, what's worth redistributing. So $50,000 is the amount that we came up with there. It's not necessarily rooted in anything scientific. It's just an amount. But there was a lot of discussion about that. And then for administrative, this third bullet I'm going to list here for administrative modifications, or I should say otherwise administrative modifications, up to $100,000 in federal funding can be returned to the applicant through administrative action. And the reason, by the applicant for administrative action. And the reason for this is that it doesn't come up a lot, but you can have something where, an example where a project could be administrative in nature to make a change, but even if it results in a small reduction of the project, I don't anticipate this happening a lot, but, and the only advantage would be that it would save the time of the process. This did come up once several years ago where somebody didn't feel like going through the process and they had no choice. So then TAB sent this back to TAC technically, but we went through the work group and funding programming for two reasons. The first reason was that members were concerned that the movement of 10% of the project value, which was all that was stated at the time, could lead to moving, for example, $3 million out of a $31 million project without committee review, and they weren't comfortable with that. And so that's why the flat amount has been added of $500,000. So that's going to be something that only small changes are really going to be able to be done administratively. Again, either way, the guidance would be to approve, but members really did want to see anything larger to go through the process and see it in front of us. And then secondly, members were concerned that multiple changes to a project could cause committees to lose sight of a project. So that 10% and 500,000 is actually going to be cumulative. And so another thing that we're going to be doing is adding for both scope changes and program year policies, any histories in the past of times that a project has gone through one of these two processes, whether it's administrative or through a committee process. And so that would enable members to see if a lot has happened to a project. And again, cumulatively on a second scope change, which would be rare but could happen, going over 10% or $500,000 would be almost certain that would go over that amount. So I know that's a lot, but I feel like we were pretty close, at least on this policy last time. So I know that's a lot, but with that, I stand for questions.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Any questions or comments on this? Yes.
Mr. Chair, I might just add that the $500,000, the 500,000, the working group thought that, that's like a traffic signal, perhaps a roundabout. So trying to put some perspective, a lot of times that's why there is a scope change. And so we felt 500,000 would be a good cutoff for the max amount.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thank you for remembering that.
Yeah, and I think that's easier to understand than, I think before there was a table in there where if it was above $1 million, it was 10%, and then if it was under, it was 10%. If it was above, it was up to a certain number. So this is much more plain language, so.
Yes, the table was confusing to even the person who typed it up myself.
Okay, appreciate that information. Thank you, Robert. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so the motion before us here, recommended motion is, roll back up here, that the Technical Advisory Committee recommend approval of the updated scope change policy for TAB's consideration again. Would anyone like to make that motion? Everyone's jumping at it.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
All right, Lyndon, and I'll second that. With that.
Is the chair supposed to do that? Doesn't bother me, I guess. I don't know.
I'll let someone else do it. How's that sound? All right, there we go. All right, Elaine seconded. So excited about it. All right. With that, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed by the same sign? All right, that action item carries. All right, next one, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. That was a lot, but the program year policy, 2024-41, is a little bit more. So this is the second time you're seeing this. And I was nervous at the time that TAB would send it back. TAB didn't have the opportunity to send it back because TAC sent it back. So, and I'll talk a bit about why that happened. There are two key reasons, and I think they've both been addressed. One of them was very, very simple, in fact. So this is a very similar story to the scope change policy in that projects being connected to other projects was the impetus for even discussing this policy. We had a lot of projects that became component to larger projects that were being done, say, 2 years later. And so in order to do what is a sensible saving of construction and making things more efficient, folks were coming in saying, can we have a 2-year extension in order to make that connection with the other project? And realistically, if you ask for a 1-year extension, 2-year extension, or 3-year extension, that doesn't necessarily mess with the budget any more than just a 1-year extension. Although that 1 year has been an incentive piece to make sure that we don't let projects drag too long. So I think history of this committee and TAB would tell you that folks are comfortable with going beyond that 1 year when things like that happen, because the rationale for moving it isn't that we're just lagging behind. The rationale is we're doing something that's efficient, that's better for the traveling public and for the budgets and the processes of the agencies involved. So there's a number of key changes that are shown. Some of them are a little bit separate from the rationale for starting it, because we did examine the whole process. For example, there's a lot of there's a little clarification language in there designed to prevent unvetted applications from coming in at the deadline. The deadline is New Year's Eve of the program year, and that's been stated forever, but Colleen Brown, who takes these in and does a lot of work on them, said, well, let's have some milestones before that, so nobody just gives us one out of the blue on New Year's Eve and expects it to be approved. So those bits in there are smaller. Exceptions to the one-time and 1 year limitations that we've always had due to extraordinary circumstances, that isn't necessarily defined, and that's by design. So this has been allowed to for exceptions beyond connections to just another project, which I found surprising. But when we presented to TAB as an info item after this was sent back, folks actually said, well, why can there be exceptions to 1 year time and one time only for connection to other projects? Shouldn't that be available for other rationale? I was a little surprised by that, but that was their point. So that is actually listed in there. Those are not defined necessarily, because there's probably things that we can't even conceive of right now that are going to happen. So there's a lot more opportunity later in the application to write down the history of your project, the story of your project, and the need for your extension. So then there's one of the sticking points was the removal of the MnDOT score sheet. You just approved one with a less than 7 score. And the rationale for this, and unfortunately Colleen couldn't make it today, but she was going to talk a little bit about this, at least if asked, was that the working group we suggested removing it because the scores aren't particularly meaningful to project readiness. Essentially, applicants work with MnDOT state aid, and MnDOT state aid understands whether the project is going to be ready to go when it says it's going to be. And the score sheets first of all, they don't incentivize early application. And if anything, they incentivize late application, or as late as possible application. And it's really about the milestones that are on the horizon. And so we do have a lot of question and answer in the drawn up application to address that. So we're hoping that folks are okay with that. The score sheet, I already said that, score sheet. Several deadline changes are shown on the application. There's a little bit of a push from April to June on I think the 3rd page or so. Those are just sort of administrative steps that we took along, or housekeeping steps we took along the way with Colleen. There's a really strange reference, and this is a small point, but about scope or program year requests being on the tab consent agenda at the chair's discretion. Honestly, nobody realized that was there before we met, so we're gonna let TAB make that decision if they want to remove that or not. You can opine if you wish. So at the September 4th meeting, TAC referred the item back to the Funding and Programming Committee, and you were concerned about the lack of the score sheet. And then you were concerned about a line that said that in each case, the application has to show that a project would be ready to authorize in the currently programmed year, which is a little bit more strict than on non-exception projects. And you all thought that was kind of, didn't make a lot of sense because a project making these requests would still be in motion for when the exact dates are happening. And so that was easy. That's just deleted. It's gone. And then TAB discussed it at September 18th meeting as an info item. And as I said, they were a little concerned with only having a very narrow rationale for why exceptions would exist, but they were also concerned with the opportunity for indefinite numbers of requests and keep coming back. And they pointed to one specific project. This has been addressed in the policy by requiring that if there's a third or beyond request brought to TAB, brought to the process, that the TAB Executive Committee would have to see it first. They only meet every other month. That would probably slow you down quite a bit, and decide whether it made sense for it to go through the process. It's sort of a stick against continuing to drag projects along, and so that has been added to alleviate that concern. So that was a little more than the last one, and with that, I would stand for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Before I turn it over to questions, I was just going to make a comment. Page 12 of 16 here in the handout, it has a good history of over the last 10 or so years, how many of these extensions have been requested. And you could see it's piling up in the last few years. Some of that is just the nature of the projects that we've been submitting and working to fund. I know a lot of us have several different funding mechanisms on these projects. So I think it's timely that this policy update is coming through, but appreciate your emphasis on that. So I'll turn it over to other questions or comments that the group might have. Brian.
So I got a lot of baggage with this process.
Oh, boy.
In particular. And I'll say, like, program year was a much bigger deal when it was between MnDOT and Met Council and how the regional funds were being managed. Now that Met Council manages that process, there hasn't been as much slippage of the program, but it used to be that something like 30% of Met Council's regional solicitation program slipped from one year to the next. And so now we're managing it differently. But I feel like we're slipping into a different area. And I'm surprised to see that we're talking about 3 program year extensions being the cutoff. And I just feel like we're de facto connecting ourselves to larger projects without really being intentional about doing that. And I'm wondering how difficult it will be when we continue to have multiple extensions, how committed we are to having that funding stay with the project. That's a bit of a philosophical shift from where this process has been, and that it was about some things, less about connecting money to a project and a project moved around. And I'm all for efficiency and trying to connect program year the right way, but when we connect to larger things and then they drag out, every incremental decision is a good one, but what it means is that each time it's harder and harder to say, we're gonna cut you loose. And I'm just not sure if we have our hands around that. And so as we continue to talk about, will the region invest these in larger projects because it makes sense and it's part of a complicated funding mechanism, and if this pulls out, the whole thing falls apart. That's a pretty difficult decision for TAB to deal with at a policy level, to say we're going to take $10 million out of a $200 million job in the face of that makes it fall apart.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to deal with that in this setting, but I feel like that's where we're heading. And so we can punt that for another day, but I just want to put it out there.
Yeah, Brian, I think that's fair. I mean, not to pick on any projects, but 252 is a prime example of that. That's working through a lot of permitting and environmental issues, and that's a project that's, I think it came in, if I'm correct, there were 2 or 3 projects tied to that received regional solicitation funding, and they were on their 2nd or 3rd request for program year extensions, and we just approved those earlier last year, I think. So I know what you're saying.
I just don't know how someone says the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th time, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, we're going to say, no, this is too much. Like, it's pretty difficult to say no that deep into the game.
the one good thing with it, it's going to draw attention to it. They're going to have to make some decisions and put some of them, hopefully. Yes, Elaine.
I've also been around a while. When the current program year policy was put in place is because there were a lot of projects shifting. And after this came in, you got 1 year, 1 request. It brought a lot of the projects to completion or they were withdrawn.
Yeah.
And this may change that. But again, within a year or two, we'll probably see that and we'll be back looking at this policy again is what I'm going to guess.
Sharon, looking at the table on page 12 that Chair MacPherson acknowledged, it starts in 2013, which is, I think, right about when the programmer policy got to the point that it was now, and that's just before my arrival, but I had heard like we were doing almost half of the program. And so you'll see from 13 to 18, we had 012, 013 extensions, and then it sort of took off in 2019. So I do think there's bigger questions about how we've got I don't know what changed in the culture or the nature of projects becoming more tied to bigger projects. And maybe that's something that even gets discussed during the regional solicitation evaluation if we wanted to discourage that. Though in terms of the immediate of what Brian's talking about, that's a lot of good questions there that I don't necessarily know how that would play out.
Yeah, Elaine.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the same thing. With the regional solicitation, we have the qualifying requirement that the project's independent utility. And so we've had some quarters of commerce projects funded, and then our solicitation projects got connected with those. And then once they were connected, they were no longer independent. And they had to move with, if that big project moved, they had to. And that's something as a discussion maybe going forward with the solicitation, relooking at that qualification, and if that changes how this happens. With the projects that were funded, especially with the quarters of commerce, those projects came in after the solicitation projects.
Right.
And maybe the requirement is they can't apply for one for an existing quarters of commerce because that would tie it. It would be no longer independent utility. For the ones that came this last round, a couple of them, that wasn't foreseen.
So you're saying if there's a project that you're thinking about submitting, if it's already got quarters of commerce money, you couldn't apply?
Because it would from the
wouldn't have
get-go,
independent
it would
utility.
not have independent utility.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's going forward, we can see that, but it was when those quarters of commerce projects came in after, or some of the ABRT, or not ABRT, but
LRT.
LRT, yeah.
LRT projects, they got connected and they had to move with them, otherwise it didn't make sense to put sidewalk improvements into a station that didn't exist yet. So it's what's happening to those larger projects.
Molly.
Thanks, Chair. 252, I think, is a good discussion item. There are 4 or 5 regional solicitation awards on it. There's a Minnesota Freight Grant Award on it. Quarters of Commerce money came after at least 2 or 3 regional solicitation grants were already given. The applicant was the Metropolitan Council. The way the program works is that MnDOT is required to deliver the project. We were not the original applicants. We decided to do an EIS. First money in was over 10 years ago. I think this is a really unique situation, worth a discussion. Not ideal.
Yeah.
I think that, the individual projects that get funded related to LRT projects, we see park and rides, we see ped and bike, improvement projects. I think that's worth a discussion on, like, do they have independent utility? If Hennepin County gets a interchange and Brooklyn Park gets an interchange and Brooklyn Center gets an interchange.
That's exactly what happened.
It's a corridor project in reality, but the funding, $10 million here or there doesn't build an entire interchange either, so.
Yeah.
I mean.
I think it was Robert first, then Adam. Go ahead, Robert. Either way? Okay. Go ahead, Adam.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to comment that project is unique, 252, but there are other projects that are highway projects that get into the NEIS phase. They might be intended to be a study, and then they end up in EIS, and it goes longer, and it goes longer. I don't know know if MnDOT needs to secure funding ahead of time for those, or if it's more like what happened in 252, where it was a Hennepin County thing, and it's gonna improve intersections, and then it snowballed into something else. That's one question about timing, because for projects like LRT or other transit projects, LRT specifically, part of the project development is submitting for a federal grant for a New Starts project. And so having all those pieces pulled together at that time is valuable for identifying what the funding sources are to show. But then there's the readiness question of when are you going to do it? And of course, with Southwest LRT, we were going to do it a couple of years ago, and that slipped. So I think there's a challenge for transit federally funded projects to align when are we supposed to have the funding identified and secured versus when are we going to do it. So in an LRT project, we have to have the funding identified and secured if we're on the bubble of getting approval, and that's one of the challenges we have.
It's way out in front. Yeah. Robert first.
I was just going to mention that Joe explained this did go to TAB, and so some of the feedback we heard from TAB was that they wanted flexibility. They wanted exceptions, and they talked about 252 and those very unique projects. But they also said they want to hear from the applicant. They want them to verbalize what is unique about them, extraordinary about this project. And they wanted them to make the case for why they should have the exception. And so that's why you see the policies got a lot more verbal in it and less, point here, point there. They wanted to hear what makes this so unique. So that's why the policy was written this way, or the changes are being proposed. But I think they're going into this eyes wide open. They want to have that discussion. They want to, debate whether or not this should be granted a second, third extension. So that helped guide some of the language that you're seeing being proposed today.
Thank you. I saw a couple other hands. Lyndon?
Yeah, the money side, I know there's a statement in here, Joe, about the funding. I thought it was more strict than this, where if you got a program year extension, your funding was kicked to the back of the queue. Is that still true?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
It doesn't
true.
say that. It just says funding will be contingent upon availability of federal funds.
Right.
Which is essentially what that means.
It does?
Yeah, because right now, if you have an extension.
I don't think that's what it means.
Right now, if you have an extension, if you want to extend a project till 2027, there probably isn't money in 2027 for you, so you're going to be at the back of the queue. But you might move up as other money becomes available.
2030 would be your next.
Yeah, 2030. So applicants should know that, because that's a big deal. If you delay your project, you're waiting 4 or 5 years to get your money back.
Now, if several projects withdraw in 2027, the next available funding would be 2027. So that's why we say the next available. So the next available will always be the next solicitation funding. It's taken out of that. But if enough projects withdraw, which we're not seeing a lot lately, because we're getting multiple extensions. That is the other thing about granting multiple extensions.
Yeah.
We're seeing fewer projects withdraw.
Okay.
Yes, Brian.
I totally agree with where Molly's at. I'm like, when these things all line up, it's genius. It's fabulous when it all works, and that's amazing. But when it doesn't, then I think the complexities of what really TAB is saying, I don't think, and this is no disrespect to them, like, it's complicated. Like, the whole notion of like that hierarchy of who gets the money at what time and when is it available is messy and complicated. And there's a bunch of people that are involved. And so if you take 252 and as an example, I forget where that ended up, 28, 29?
29, I think, right?
And so you're having TAB understand that not only are you allocating funds from future solicitations, but when people are going to get that money and how that all lands, I don't know that I could explain it very well. I mean, maybe in an hour and a couple of beers, but like, it'd be difficult. And so, and they as a board really, 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 really love to say yes. And so part of our job in this setting is to say, okay, like I hear what you're saying. Here's the 98 things that you need to understand in order to say, go do it, right? And that's, I mean, part of the challenge here. And that's where readiness helps you say, like, there have been projects in the past where, you know, a partner, and not to pick on any one partner, but one partner came in and kept saying, I need a program year extension because I'm working with the railroad and they're totally going to come around this year. And the whole room went, oh, yeah, whatever, right? And it never happened. So we all know that, right? There's things that we know, like if you're going to say, this time it's happening, unlikely that it really is.
Right.
And helping TAB understand that choice. And 252 is a unicorn, and so is light rail on some level, but like, when a project is that big, there's always a risk that something is gonna go sideways and it's gonna take a lot longer. But I just, like, that complexity, how we convey that to TAB in this policy and help them say, boy, in this instance, it really doesn't make sense to continue to push that out is imperative.
Right.
Sounds like I have a partner to join me at the next TAB meeting to talk about all this.
Sure, yeah, I can be loud
I'll
when
meet
I
for
need
coffee
to.
and do that.
Chair.
Yes.
And also,
Hi, I think
another
I had
thing,
my
as
hand
you look forward to the next solicitation, when you're looking at your maximum award, what you can request, if the requests go up, the larger, it goes from 10 million to 15 million, and you get one of these you're moving a lot of money out of the next solicitation. So
Yep.
right now, we've got, I don't know, is it 26 million that's taken out of the next solicitation? If you do another 20 million, that's 46 million. It adds up over time as you're doing this, especially when now it's multiple years moving out. And to get a 3-year extension, you're not really getting a penalty at this point because that's when the funding's going to be available. You'll build it and get reimbursed then.
Right.
Yes, Molly.
Thanks, Chair. So I think that there has been some discussions of whether or not just to give up the award and reapply in future solicitations, with the thinking that these scored well once enough to get funding, they will score well enough to get an award the next time. And I think maybe there's some partners in the room that have done this, maybe on Big Bridge over here, St. Paul. But also with the change of the solicitation, with the evaluation after every solicitation, and then the big one that's working on right now, I don't think it's guaranteed that a project will continue to score well enough to get funding. And especially with expansion, the GHG laws that we're going to be we are implementing, I think, I think reapplying for these will be more difficult.
In the case of 252, they wouldn't be able to because they would now violate the rules of being connected to each other.
I was just going to say that too. And
Also, we don't do EISs very often. There's only been 3 EISs done in the Metro District in the last 25 years. St. Croix, Rethinking, and 252.
40 years.
So it's not a common occurrence.
Was there like 40 million in
Yeah, Mr. Chair, but, there's an opportunity there. I got the end, but it's a very valid point that there are a lot of projects. It's really difficult, and we're dealing with this on several bridge projects. It's really hard to get those multiple funding sources when you've got these limitations and restrictions on the types of funds that you have. So there needs to be some flexibility because otherwise some of these projects will literally never happen. You can't make them happen unless there's enough flexibility there for those projects. So kind of just want to point out that flexibility is super important, and those bridges are a great example.
Yeah, good point. Yes, Elaine.
and we've had several projects, I just mentioned, that withdraw and then reapply because without the 1-year extension. And we're funded again. It's happened a couple times on some projects. And then when they're actually getting the funding, it's not 1 or 2 years out, they're getting it the year of the solicitation, which would have been, if they'd gotten a 2-year extension, they would have built it and waited for the funding. Now they'll apply, get the year that the funding is, but they can still advance construct. And then if there's funding available, get funded earlier. So a lot of times it is advantageous to withdraw and then reapply. But in the case with the projects connected to 252, they are not all independent projects anymore, so only a couple of them could reapply.
Yeah. Well, and that's in the STIP now too, right? Is it still hanging in the STIP?
I believe the regional solicitation awards are in the STIP, and we are Court of Commerce monies, in the end of this last year.
Okay, good comments. I'll try and capture that and share that with TAB as much as I can.
And if I can be helpful, I'm happy to be.
Sounds good. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments on this item? Want to save a little time for some more discussion on the regional solicitation. Okay, with that, scroll up here. So our recommended motion is to have the Technical Advisory Committee recommend approval of the updated program year policy. Would anyone like to move that?
I'll move that.
Thank you, Lyndon. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Adam. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign. All right, that one passes. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joel.
All right, next we will move into the informational items. And the first one is we have Mr. Fisher here with us today. You're going to present on the Regional Transportation and Climate Change Multimodal Measure Study. It's a mouthful.
Chair,
Turn it over to you.
can I just
Yes.
ask a question?
Yes.
Our meeting's over in like less than 40 minutes. We still have regional solicitation to go. I just want to know the timeliness of this versus the other info item and whether, I don't know anything about this or whether it's timely or not. Knowing we all came in person for regional solicitation, is it an option for us to flip these two items, or is this super timely as well that we need to cover this too?
Yeah, let me turn that over to Steve and Tony. What are your thoughts on that question?
It's up to you, Tony.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, this committee.
We'll maybe try and give Tony some time at the end here, if there's some. So.
Good. All right, we'll flip-flop those two. Thank you.
That's fine.
All right, so we're going to move to informational item number 2. Turn it over to Steve.
Okay, we had a good, you may remember we were in person last month here. We had a good discussion on the regional solicitation. Since then, we've had a half a dozen or more meetings with different groups, technical group, policy work group, the transit work group, among others. And do feel like we're starting to come together on some consensus here, and we'll continue to do so over the next few months. So again, what we're working on right now is some of the feedback that we've heard that projects should better align with the regional policy goals, and the current structure makes it difficult to focus funding on desired outcomes. So those are a few of the things that we've heard that we're focusing on at the structure level. This was our meeting back last month here, and Chair MacPherson has given this slide a few times to other groups here on tried to capture a longer discussion on some of the key points there. Do you want to give a few of the highlights that maybe from what you remember from last month?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So many of you are familiar with these points. I'll just roll through these quickly. So the first bullet point there, the desire to have the technical staff working pretty much alongside the policymakers, that was well received at the policymaker work group. They supported that. I know Chair Hovland also agreed with that. And so they actually put a lot of tasks back towards the technical steering committee group and TAC to provide some input on where these buckets of money are going to look like. Are we going goal-focused or hybrid, which we'll get into here in a minute. And so I appreciate that. To achieve the goals, project criteria cannot be watered down. There was some head nodding with that, which I think was a good sign, where they understood the point of view that when you try and meet everything, you don't meet anything. So if all your goals are top priorities, none of them are top priorities. So need to clarify and think carefully about the wording of the project categories. We've had a number of discussions about that. Desire for asset management to be included. So again, bridges, those types of things, roadway modernization, general support for the outcomes of the workshop, but devil's in the details. And then geographic balance will remain a major consideration for any structure. So yeah, I think those were all well received and they understood where we were coming from.
Good, thank you. So then the next week, we took that information to the policy work group, had a good meeting there. Again, they, as Chair MacPherson said, general support for simplifying the application categories. We asked them about a few of the goal areas in the 2050 TPP, one of those being equity, whether that should be a standalone project application category. And the advice they gave us was, no, it shouldn't be kind of an equity project, but should be embedded maybe in some way similar to the way it is right now as more of a scoring measure or qualifying requirement. So that was one question we asked them. We also asked them more about kind of the resiliency and climate and natural systems, how that all could fit together, and got some feedback that maybe some grouping of those topic areas was appropriate, just so we didn't have too many application categories. Again, they wanted to push back a lot of the details on how this came together, from groupings, division of project types, bringing it together back on the technical steering committee. which did meet at the end of the month. Chair Omi, I'll give him a chance to kind of add on to some of the key takeaways there, but we talked about the modal plus or hybrid structure, and felt like there was general agreement that we're heading the right direction there. But again, the devil's kind of in the details, and once we start developing measures that may necessitate a change to go back and kind of reassess the application categories, if it's kind of the right groupings or not. And we heard that the transit work group too, like, we kind of like where you're going, but we want to see like the next couple steps before we say yes to this step, is maybe something that we've heard a few times. Quite a bit of discussion on active transportation and how that fit into the regional solicitation, both from a timing perspective and funding category. And then the last couple bullet points here, further discussion on potential planning grants. So I'd say people kind of on both sides of that, maybe discussion on whether we should use either some of the federal money or some of the active transportation money on planning grants. And then there was some interest in further discussing kind of larger projects. Should we have, in some of these categories, 1 or 2 larger projects for a larger amount? And then maybe similar to ABRT, what we've done in the past, and then the rest of the project types that are more similar in nature compete against each other. So Chair Omi, anything else you want to point out here?
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Chair. I think it was that meeting, we did have a lively discussion on, the structure. I think that's where the topic really needed to so I think we kind of honed in on that hybrid structure, and I think a lot of people were supportive of that and moving forward with looking at that in more detail. Like Steve had mentioned, the devils will be in the details. So I think a lot of the sub groups that are going to be working on some of those categories of the modes, that's going to be flesh out on how that all is going to be structured. A lot of the discussion, I think we did talk about, larger projects, how to, a lot of the solicitation applications goes into applying for some seed money for some of these larger projects. Does it make more sense to have a pot of money out there for larger projects and just go after interchange and try to help fund those projects a little bit more. So a lot of work to do here yet. We still have to, flesh out a lot of how that structure is going to be eventually handled, but I think a lot of the work we're going to have to still work through the process and see where it goes. But I think the biggest takeaway that their group had was, we need to make this application easy for the applicants to apply for. Where should they apply? Know exactly where their best bet is to get score well and then go from there. So that.
Good. Thank you. So again, we were talking. We'll kind of lead you through a series of PowerPoint slides that talked about how we got to this modal plus or hybrid structure. So first we started with more of our existing modal-based structure that you're familiar with. A few of the challenges that we and the consultant team noticed. One, it was difficult for some of these newer project types to fit into that structure, and then also it wasn't apparent if TAB wanted to put more money towards safety, exactly what to do, because it was buried within the measures. So in thinking about some of these new project types and new goal areas, that's how we started building out what started as a modal structure. And people, I think at the technical level, were kind of familiar with that structure. So in keeping with that bike ped, transit, and roadways, and then thinking about some of the newer project areas, EV charging, and maybe moving TDM to a more appropriate place that fit under kind of the climate, natural systems goal area. And moved resiliency, which is currently under dynamic and resilient, over into the natural systems area. Then the second bullet point on the challenge was how to kind of better address safety. And within the modal structure, you can see how we're pulling over, or proposing to pull over into a new goal area, safety. And the one idea that we did flow with the technical steering committee was we said, well, the HSIP program has shown kind of tremendous safety benefits when you compare them against some of the projects that we've funded here. It's because they're highly focused on that outcome of reducing Ks and As. And so what we talked about with the technical steering committee is, could we do something similar, a proactive and a reactive safety categories, similar to HSIP, but it would be maybe a slightly higher dollar value. So HSIP, again, the maximum award is $2 million. And so this would be something to get at a little bit bigger project than that, and we'd have to discuss what that kind of right amount might be. The group also talked about, should we have a separate either safe routes to school or bike ped safety category underneath here? And that's what we brought to the technical steering committee. And several of the members said, well, under the HSIP scenario, all modes can apply for both proactive and reactive. And in fact, we've been funding a lot of kind of bike ped projects. I think the top scoring project last time was a bike ped project. And so it perhaps could be encapsulated within a proactive reactive safety category and not a standalone bike ped safety one. But that's, I think, more discussion to be had there. So this is the general setup. Again, kind of exactly how we name it. If there's subparts to some of these, the technical steering committee said, well, for even complete streets or reliability, excessive delays, should there be kind of subcategories where we fund one bigger project, one or two bigger projects, and a subset of other ones? So those are kind of the next steps, I think, for the group, but this is the general layout. And again, we'll call it maybe a modal plus. So it's kind of that modal structure that people are familiar with, plus addressing safety in a more direct way and bringing in some of the new project types and goal areas from the 2050 TPP. Again, those are all tying back to specific objectives and policies that are within the plan. And so, you don't see it maybe here from the shorthand, but behind the scenes, those are all tying back to the policies and objectives that many of you worked on over the past 3 years. So some of the discussion, even that we're going to bring to TAC planning, Mr. Chair, next week is, does the structure kind of meet the goal of better aligning with the 2050 TPP? What are some technical challenges or things that you'd like to talk about? And then are there any messages that this group wants to send back to the policy work group, which meets, I guess, in 2 weeks' time here? So you can see some of the, we're going to be quite busy, just like we have been the last month here, going to a lot of different groups. And with both kind of bike ped and transit working groups, kind of digging into some of those details here in the future. But maybe the last thing to mention too is we've got a structure of special issue working groups. And so those, if I go back to here, it'll likely be something like a safety special issue working group, bike ped, transit, roadway will probably have one. And then that natural systems climate may have a few, just because they're kind of disparate topic areas. And then there may be one on equity. So those are kind of the potential special issue working groups that we'd like technical feedback on. And that's more of a kind of an April and beyond timeframe that we're going to be getting those groups more together. Again, bike ped and transit already have those established groups, so we're meeting really already with those, but then we're going to be looking to establish over the next 2 months here members of those other committees here. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you, and again, see if there's any kind of technical feedback on where we're headed and other questions.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So we've got about 25 minutes left with respect given to Tony. If we don't have time today, Tony, we will sneak you in on the next agenda. But with that, I want to open it up to the group here. I think today, like Steve mentioned, this is not a formal action item. This is an info item, but are we headed in the right direction? Do you guys like what you see on the screen? Are we in the right trajectory here? So let's open it up to the group here, and who wants to kick the soccer ball first? All right, Lissa.
Before I answer that, can I ask a different question?
Sure.
What's is this exact same thing then intended to go to TAB at their next meet? Like, when is the head nod scheduled for TAB on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. That would be April TAB meeting.
Okay. Other people can go into.
Maybe I'll start, just throw a few comments in there. I think based on the conversation we had last week at the technical steering group, there's a lot of great ideas, thoughts shared, a lot of problems that we work through in the current regional solicitation process. Not that it's bad, but just things that we run into hurdle-wise. I do appreciate seeing the safety category on there. I think all of us have elected officials or superiors that want to see that. I know our communities want to see that, so I'm supportive of that. The HSIP program is something that works very well. I think that's a well-thought-out program that's been dialed in over the years. And I think it's very simple to understand. It's easy to replicate and also evaluate to see what's coming of the money that's spent. The green box or the climate change natural systems, I think that leaves an element to provide for opportunities in the future. One of the items that we talked about was that equity side of things. And I know that the policy working group, for those that haven't heard yet, when they went around the room, everybody had a different opinion of what equity means. There's a different definition, and even Connie Sahibjam, he mentioned the same thing, that his definition might be different than the next person. So really need to dial that in, and I know Amy Venowitz is working on a project over the next 18 months on that, so more to come there, but I personally like where it's headed. I like that we still have the modal ranges in the middle. That's something we can all relate to, but it gives you that the goal-orientated focus that I think everyone's looking for to tie it back to 2050. Okay.
There you go. Got him started.
Got him, there we go. We're fishing.
Mr. Chair, Steve, what are the funding ranges that we might contemplate for these? Because it really depends on how many projects we could expect, I would think, for those two new categories. And there's some overlap between safety and everything else. So how do you navigate what's a safety project versus a bike project versus a facility and a transit project or a highway project? Because there's a lot of overlap between all those.
Steve, you want to grab that one?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair and members, what we've told the policy work group of TAB members and council members is that where they would be deciding and giving us guidance on the money would be that top level safety, dynamic, and climate natural systems. So those would be, at least this first round, kind of the buckets where they would give us a range or a number that they would expect, and then applicants can have some certainty. Many of the boxes are representative of potential application categories. Many of those boxes are modal focused. There's a few that maybe aren't, but many of them, safety would be one that isn't, but many of the transit ones are, modal focus as kind of shown there. And so I think having some more certainty on where a specific project would apply. And again, it's what's the main thrust of the project. Is it safety? Is it complete streets? Is it excessive delays? That's your cue as to where to apply, but I think putting some more details to that and perhaps even working with applicants before they submit it is, we heard that technical steering committee too, Chair MacPherson.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, Alyssa.
Two things. One, when I sat in on the policymaker work group, I think there was only maybe 7 policymakers on that work group there. I was surprised how few were there, and I went back to the notes, and it seems like it's been dropping off at every meeting. So I just want to be cognizant that when we talk about input from that group in particular, if there was only a tiny subset, it was less than half of the people there. I just want to be a little bit careful about the weight of that group and what they're saying, because it was not a lot of them. So I don't know if it's now a scheduling issue or just burnout or what, or maybe it was an anomaly last meeting and there weren't very many, but I just want to be cognizant. And if that is the case again, I think you all need to be very clear that when we say that, it wasn't the 18 members that are assigned to that, it was 7. So just a note on that. The other piece that I've been thinking about, and I'm saying this and I don't necessarily have an opinion on it, but the equity component of this, there's been a lot of discussion about we want a goal-based, outcome-based thing, because that is then how we're going to achieve said goals. And if equity is important, then is equity showing up in every single one of these? And if it is, it's likely 10% of a scoring measure. And so then we are watering equity down, quite a bit. And so there's some groups that felt equity needed to be a very important component of the regional solicitation. And so I want this group to potentially think about, if that is a really important thing to this region, does there need to be a category that's equity-focused in which almost the majority of points are equity-based, as opposed to putting a tiny percentage of equity on every single one of these? Because as we've discussed a lot, then that will never move the mark on anything if it's a tiny bit. And once again, I'm saying this neutrally. I'm not sure where I even stand on that, but I think it's something that comes up quite a bit and needs to at least be in our minds. And I have a feeling TAB or policymakers will talk about this. Once again, I'm not necessarily one way or the other, but I think it's something worth at least discussing. Or maybe it was at that last meeting. And
We'll go Elaine and then Adam.
I think the thought was it would be in that right column and possibly a future application, waiting for the results of the highway harm study. And so it's going to be, I would guess, in the future when they figure out what it would be, and maybe in the meantime, as a measure to keep it in. I would also, we don't know what's happening on the federal level with anything that mentions equity or climate, and maybe having them in a separate category helps that if the feds say funding doesn't go into these, the next solicitation has $0 in that category and more in the others. I mean, that might be a way to make our solicitation flexible without putting it in everything and then they start pulling projects. I don't know. It's always in the back of your mind of what's going to happen with that federal funding, what's eligible.
Yeah, that conversation was had there. Adam? No, go
We're
here.
just continuing the thought exercise. So if there's an equity category, do we just get to choose which category we want to apply in and what one we think will score the best with the competition that's there, depending on how much funding is there? Because if I have a project that's a micro project in South Minneapolis, well, let's see who else is going to apply for the equity category. Am I going to do better there than I do in the transit category? And how does that work? And I don't know what's gained by it necessarily. I don't know that anything for, at least for transit, that hasn't been funded that we would want funded that it's going to help with, because the outcomes are the same. It's only a question of, well, now we're identifying the subcategory because we can and the policymakers want to, but the outcome is going to be the same, I think.
Yes. Yes.
I had or just kind of going on the comments around equity, a process question and then a comment. So if equity is embedded within each of them, like where does the scoring component of this structure or potential structure come in? Like, is that progressing at the same time so people understand the relationship between the two, or is it like a phase two?
Steve.
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, I think it's largely a phase two, and that's the technical working groups that we're, I guess, special issue working groups that we're proposing to establish would really over the next 6 months would dig into the measures. And part of the reason we didn't have the structure like this go as an action item to the committees was because we know there's probably going to be some kind of feedback loop from what the measures are back into what these application categories are named or how they're grouped. And so that's why it's more of it's an information item that's coming to this committee in April and then to TAB in April. So I think it's largely kind of a phase one, phase two type thing, but I think there has to be a little bit of feedback loop coming back after we dig into the details.
And my comment piece of this, thank you for that, Steve. If equity is being considered, like you said, Elaine, as its own thing, I would recommend that it's shown there now. I don't understand the connection between we must have a highway harm study to be able to have that, and maybe that's something I just am not understanding, but I think it goes into the scoring pieces and how you would qualify. I think there's other things that we know as a region that could fit into that if that was a thing, notwithstanding the federal piece you said, Elaine, that we wanted to have as something emphasized through this.
So the initial feedback we got from the policy work group was not to have it as a standalone category of equity because they thought it was premature because the study was just kicking off, that it would be better to talk about it 2 years from now.
And so that's the initial feedback, and like Alyssa said, maybe it was half of the group was there, but they said they would rather see it kind of embedded throughout most or all of the application categories versus a standalone application category. That's that's the initial feedback we've received.
Alyssa, was your hand up there a minute
No,
ago?
you can.
Yeah, I have a correction to what I said.
Yeah.
It was, the equity was not part of the climate change, it was a fifth one.
Yeah,
It was a fifth column that they said to hold off on making that a category at this time because of, and then put it in as each of the applications. And I would say that the first step is getting the main structure, then next it would be tab deciding with assistance from the technical groups what the criterion will be, or criteria for each of them. And then the technical groups will then take and create measures for each of those criterion of how to measure that thing. I mean, that was what they did last time.
Chad?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think the way the structure of the presentation is very helpful, to kind of step through with the colors and boxes shifting. I think that's good job to staff on that. And then maybe just to address that equity, can there just be mention of it, that it is the next step to tab, or it's the next phase, or kind of not have it be missing in here, have it up front that we are considering that, and it's kind of, you know, it's a next phase to figure out how it fits in these categories. Thanks.
That's a good idea, yeah.
That is a good idea. Yes, Molly?
Thanks, Chair. Minnesota Department of Transportation does have a definition of transportation equity. And while there might be different opinions, our TAB representative knows that. I know there's a lot of changes with federal administration and policies and directions and executive orders. I think that's a good discussion for policymakers to understand how important equity is, if it is something the region and the state believes in enough to put out there, or to embed it within other categories. I think that's also acceptable. I know we have this study coming up. I would not want to see only, that prescribed projects have to come out of that process. I think we run into that with the RBTN, where we see locals being frustrated with things not getting funded if they're not on the RBTN. And I think equity is going to be doubly important because of how much responsiveness to the community needs and wants, and things we don't know as technicians about that. So I'm just putting that out there. I don't have any answers to how this should go either.
Yeah, thank you. Innocent, I had you next.
Just adding to what Molly just said, MPCA also has its own definition of equity that is linked or aligned with the environmental work that we do. So probably it's closer to what she's talking about, of MnDOT definition. So since I know it's very important, and if you talk to most of those, even the policy members, or TAB members, they recognize that as a very important part of areas that we should include in this process. So right now, since some people mentioned that it's not complete because Med Council is doing some specific work on equity, and that report is not just ready. And we planning to put it as a measure maybe in some of the categories. So the important thing is to see what type of point, because when we get into the application and also the measures, we have to come up with one specific point and assign. If it is an important part of process, then the point that we assign should be much higher to show that it's important. Then something that was also add is that we're talking about aligning a process with the goal or 2050 TPP goals. And one of those ones we have safety and healthy. But if you look at this process or the maps and structure that we have, we only see safety. Where is the health one? So it's good that we planning to have a special group to look at some of these, a lot of projects on areas and measures where they would fit. I think those special groups should help because you're looking at climate change or natural system. We talk of greenhouse gas. Transportation is number one emission of greenhouse gas. So where would we put it? And we have the TDM or other criteria pollutants. We almost have level of exceeding PM 2.5 standard in the state because it was reduced from 12 to 9. And there are a few places in the cities that are at 9 level. And so it's good that we're doing the special group so that we kind of work together and see where some of these projects or areas that we think are important should fit. I know we are in the right direction, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, great points. I'm going to go to Chris and then Lissa.
I think there was a lot of good comments, but I would echo Molly's comments that I really think this needs to go to TAB for a philosophical discussion. Because over time, I've seen it, regional balance, we're talking about equity, and equity doesn't necessarily mean regional balance. And then you have these executive orders that are coming out. I'll also echo that I like the new structure. I think it's a lot clearer. I think we're going in the right direction, but I'm worried we won't be able to land the plane with everything that's going on. And maybe we won't satisfy TAB when we start talking equity, and then maybe there's some shifts in regional balance.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Lissa.
Couple things. Obviously, the federal stuff is a mess. I'm a little bit hesitant of us attempting to predict that future. And I think I would be more comfortable, and my commissioners would be more comfortable to go based on what we want as this region and us as locally. And if we have to, there's going to be lawsuits for years. Like, if we're going to have to pivot, we're going to have to pivot. And for us to guess on what the outcome is going to be seems like we're never going to meet it anyway. That's where I am on that. Obviously, we have to keep that here, but it seems really premature to make decisions now based on that insanity happening. The other piece is, from what I heard happened last week at the technical working group, I was not there, but one of my staff was, there was some discussion about potentially pulling out that local bikes gaps and barriers out of this and having that maybe be the focus of the active transportation fund. I also want to be really hesitant of pulling anything now. That group is so far from making any decisions. And once again, if this all aligns and, say 8 months from now, they have made decisions and they're like, yep, we're putting all of our money on just the RBTN. That's all we want is these huge connections, big budget projects. Then we pull that bucket out of here. But I just want to be careful about us guessing where they're going to land on that because that group isn't even close on figuring out what they want. The other piece is where is what we were referring to as the asset management. That doesn't appear to be showing up here anywhere. The pavement projects, so rehabilitate, what was the category in the last?
Roadway modernization.
It wasn't modern, was it modernization?
Yeah. Construction modernization.
Reconstruction modernization, that's, okay, so that shows up there. Does that include bridges? Or is that?
Yeah, so to that point, so bridges could fit into a couple of these different categories.
Okay.
Is kind of what the thought was, but I know there is an interest from several members that there's a standalone bridge or asset preservation. I've heard that as well.
Okay.
So, yep, good points. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just some clarification on when, at what point will we know the funding buckets or percentages in each category once that's determined? Because I can't sit here and say that I like it or dislike it. Once I know where those dollars are, I might have a very strong opinion, ultimately, because I'm working on the assumption that if we're creating these new categories, we're going to be pulling from the quote-unquote standard or current categories. Is that a fair assumption? And if that's the case, what percentage is being pulled? To Adam's point earlier, I might be looking at something in the transit category, but hey, there's more money over here in safety. Well, transit's definitely safety related, so I'm going to throw all my eggs in that basket. So it's hard to react without knowing what the funding percentages are going to be.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I think that's a kind of last step in this process. So I
understand why it is, but
disappoint you, but we can maybe start having some of those conversations, but that seems like later, like where the money goes, because we don't want that to too much dictate kind of where the structure is happening. Right, Elaine, would you agree with
Well,
that?
the funding ranges will be adopted before the applicants are, that's part of the package. So before you apply, you will know what the funding ranges are. So it's toward the end of adopting the applications, but before you apply, you will know. So you'll know where the funding is most likely to be by category, and maybe Tab will make more of a, because, you know, there's more categories, but then within, like dynamic, there's now 3 categories. So there might be a range in dynamic, but then multiple ranges underneath that dynamic. We don't, I mean, but again, before you apply, you'll know.
I think what you're getting at, though, is you'd like to know, as we're going through the process, kind of an idea, right? To give you just a, a
It's
weighting
more
on it.
just curious where in the process. So I think you did answer that question.
And
just where in the
that
process.
may change from solicitation to solicitation. So with the safety now as a category, Tab may say, in 28, we want to do more safety, so we'll move the range to more safety, because that will get some ideas of what goal they want to hit each time. Or lately, you know, they've just kept the ranges pretty close to the same each year, but that might change based on the goal they want to meet that year.
So I know we're getting short on time. We got 2 minutes left on the clock. I want to be mindful of everyone's schedules and stuff. Brian, you had your hand up.
Quick question.
Yeah.
When we talk about safety, does all of this presume that HSIP is folded into this, or does it continue to be this kind of parallel process of HSIP goes along and then there's the regional solicitation?
Yeah, I think, so Mr. Chair and members, we're meeting with MnDOT staff this week, or next week actually, on that very point, on if it's kind of parallel timelines, et cetera. That, you know, this would be a little different because the maximum would likely be higher than the current HSIP program, and it would be 80-20, you know, it wouldn't be a 90-10 like the HSIP program is. But kind of how that, you're asking how that interacts with the current, MnDOT's current program? So that's.
I mean, if you're folding HSIP into this, then it looks one way, and I don't think there's anything preventing you from supplementing HSIP with other money. Right. You know, so there's ways to do it. I'm just saying, if you build it into this, then it looks one way. Because that was, I don't know what it is now, $25 million or so.
Yep, I think more discussions to be had on that. Yep. Because we're I think at the point of, is this even a good idea? You know, this was just an idea that we heard from several members that we're floating at this point, so.
Yeah. With that, Steve, I think, barring any other questions, maybe just a general head nod. Are we headed in the right direction? Is the group headed in the right direction? I see mainly head nods up and down, which is good. Any thoughts? Kind of, maybe, not sure, yeah. So more work to do. I think that, you know, like all of you have said, I'm in the same boat. You kind of want to see some of the next steps before you make decisions on this previous step, and the policymakers are in the same boat too. They kind of want to see 4 steps ahead before they make an answer on step 1. So with that, yeah, a couple more questions.
One comment on the schedule, Steve. I think I brought this up at the working group. You know, is there enough time to get all this done? I know part of this is you have a new software, right, or something that will be in the app. There's a lot of work to do between now and the end. Do we have a backup plan? Do we need a backup plan? I guess you can think about that.
Yeah. You know, they're.
Give it all to Carver County.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the backup plan. What is it? Yeah. You know, I think part of it is, do you delay it? I mean, we could delay the release, would be one option, and then, or use the old software packet, and there's a couple different iterations probably of what could happen if we need more time.
Okay. Ms. Elaine?
Actually got 2 now after that. Also think of if there's anything we're missing here. I mean, we've got these categories we're talking about we funded before, but is there projects that are missing in any of these categories? Keep that in mind. Yep. And then for the software, we are in the process, Web Grants is getting a major upgrade. So we saw it in December, and now they put it on pause because they wanted to make some more improvements. But it does look more app. It's gone from DOS to an app. It does look a lot better.
More floppy disks, Elaine?
Yeah, so, and so depending on the capabilities of that, or we would go with different software, but so far it's looking really good.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Steve, for that presentation. Still got a ways to go, but good information. Yes, Brian?
One last question. Can somebody explain what transit customer experience is?
I didn't choose that.
It's a great question, Brian.
Mr. Chair, I think those are both facilities, the experience the customers have at facilities as well. And I think I'm guessing it's called customer experience because it might include things like customer information, real-time signs, and that kind of thing. Fair technology.
Thanks.
Further discussion would be. So with that, yeah, what's, like, Steve, working groups?
Yeah.
When will those be developed? Or invites?
Yeah, I would imagine, well, the first step is we're gonna go back to the technical steering committee at the end of this month and make sure we got the right working groups and talk about maybe who might chair those from that technical steering committee. So I'd imagine it's more of a March activity.
Okay, thanks, Steve. With that, unless there's any other pressing business, we'll consider this adjourned. Appreciate your time today, guys.
I know, I get it too.
Labrie, good to see you.
Well, if we were talking in the realm of like,
I expected that.
Probably worth sitting down with people and